Welcome to Kudos AMPM, a podcast exploring the future and impact of design innovation as they intersect with technology, art, and business. I'm your host, John Kudos. Our guest today is actually someone I haven't met in person yet, but we overlap through our separate journeys with the Type Directors Club. Mark DeWin, welcome to the AMPM podcast.
Thank you, John. Awesome. It's really such a privilege to be invited on Kudos AMPM. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no. I feel like we've known each other for so long, and as I was preparing for this recording, I thought, I don't think I've met Mark. It's so wild.
Not yet. I've yet to make my way down to New York City in the last, my gosh, 10 years. I've not been here for 10 years.
Yeah. So you are in Singapore. So what time is it over there?
10:09 p.m. So
Oh,
it's the end of a very long day.
yeah. So it's 10 a.m. here in New York. So we are complete opposites here. Um, so you've probably had a long day already. So I'm thankful for you to be here. Now, you just celebrated a birthday.
Yes, I did. So yeah, I crossed the 4 decades mark, and yeah, it was a good time of just reflecting on life, family, work, and it's interesting to think about what the next decade looks like. I think prior to the actual birthday, I was trying to reflect on the lessons I've learned, what sort of person I've become, and where I guess there's room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. But I think earlier today I was just thinking about it, and I realized this next decade is actually incredibly important. I need to sort of make the
Mm.
best out of it, right? I think people talk about 40s being your new 30. And so I was like, sure, okay, I don't know if I have all the energy I did when I turned 30, but I definitely want to make it sort of memorable and meaningful in this next decade, right? To sort of set up by the time you're 50, you're like, yeah, I did a great job in my 40s, and I smashed it for 10 years.
My God, yeah. So you need to introduce yourself. So for those who don't actually know who you are, can you say a few things about yourself?
I'm a designer. I live and work in Singapore. I am half Belgian, half Singaporean. My dad is Belgian, hence the Win name. My mum is Singaporean, but I've more or less lived and grown up here, I would say 98% of the time. I currently work as a type designer and type educator, but I've previously had roles in MNC sort of agencies, and also set up sort of a couple of design agencies here in Singapore, focusing on branding, typography, and editorial and design work. So yeah, that's a sort of a quick professional sort of thing. I am a relatively active member of TDC, although not as active as you could be if you were based in New York, which I am not. And I've had the privilege of being a TDC Ascender in 2018. So yeah, I also have 4 kids, which takes up the rest of the time when you're not designing. And I'm currently
I feel you, man. I have two, and you have
yes,
twice as much. So I don't envy you, I have to say.
I would say that it's good training. People talk about work-life balance. I think it's a myth, but I think find harmony is the word I would use.
Oh,
Find
I
work-life
love that.
harmony. Yeah. Especially when you run your own business, which you will be very familiar with, John. But you also have a family and you have responsibilities there. I think it's not an easy thing to juggle. And so yeah, I feel like this is the third time around I'm doing this, to try and find
Hmm.
this magic harmony. And every time it looks different because you have more kids, you're in a different situation, you are in a different sort of work environment or scenario. So yeah, it's an interesting puzzle to solve. One that I hope that design will give some insights to. How do you design not just the work, but design the life?
Design is, you know, making a system in a way,
Yes.
right? You're
Yep.
you're
Yep.
trying to control the outcome of a number of things, right? It's like figuring out how to solve a puzzle. But I don't know, like do you need to design your life in a way, I think when we have, our firstborn child, and then 5 years later we had our second, they really put things in perspective, and as you
Mm,
have for the third time again, right? Um, and it really made me realize when we started the family that it's no longer about as like it's actually about the family in many ways. And even now, I still think about my kids. They're 5 and 10 now. I think yours is much older, right?
I have the full spectrum. We'll get into that later.
Okay, we'll get to that. But anyway, so for my point is, put things in perspective, and I think having children that look up to you all the time, at home, and you sort of have to become this role model to them. So you have no choice but to become this best version of you in front of them.
I was also going to say, this whole design your life thing, it really depends on who you ask, right? If you ask those guys at Stanford, they're really big on design your life and, how to sort of apply design principles and design thinking. But I have a slightly more, one of my favoriteest quotes is from a teacher that I had called Peter van Blokland. And he has
Mhm.
this hilarious, it took me a while to figure out, like, I couldn't decide whether he was pulling out leg, but he was dreadfully serious. He was like, design the design process. And you're like, wait, what? Design the design process, so it's like it's so meta level, like, okay. And it kind of forces you to think that, okay, well, actually everything can be put into a system or put into order or to have that higher level of thinking. Yeah, I'll be the first to admit though, like it's a lot of it is for me at the moment rapid prototyping. You try something, that didn't really work. Okay, let's try again today or tomorrow and see
Yeah.
if that's any better. And you're trying, you try very hard to find a system that works. But when you do, and it does, kind of sing, right? Like, yeah, you're suddenly in that flow state, and I think that's really important for designers or creatives to be in.
Let's talk about that. I mean, that flow state that you just mentioned here. I'm not a type designer. I don't design fonts or anything, right? But I know that it takes forever to design a typeface.
It does.
So yeah, how do you? I mean, I struggle to just get into a zone, find my moment, so I can get my one project done sometimes, and then you have a project that would last months,
Mm.
years, maybe. How does that work? Like, how do you handle that?
I think for me, I feel like they have lasted very long because after coming back from doing the type of media program, exactly 10 years ago, or it would be 10 years
Sorry,
in
where's
July.
the type media program?
Type media program is in The Hague, in the Netherlands,
Hmm.
and it's a year long, more or less, type design intensive program where you eat, breathe, and other unmentionables. Type design. A few things that I've learned because of type design, I would say, is that you have to be very clear about the decisions or what you want to say because you start getting influenced. Oh, there was this trend. This guy released this new thing. Oh, that's so cool. I like that shape. Let's put it in. And then if it doesn't fit, then you spend a lot of time trying to make all the other letters fit. Yeah. So I think, one of the ways that I think one of the things that you learn in type design in order to kind of be more focused and succinct is that you just have to be really clear about the idea. And one of the good ways to do that is to sketch as much as possible first.
I'm curious. When did you take that the type design program in The Hague?
2013 to 2014. So I left Singapore August 2013, started in 20 September, and then you graduate in July 2014.
Now, before that, were you a design student or were you a practicing designer already?
At the time I went to The Hague, I had run a small graphic design studio
Hmm.
with about 5 people for 3 years. Yeah. So
Mm,
I,
okay.
I delved into entrepreneurship without really knowing what it really meant early on.
Yep.
That was quite funny. I had worked. My first job out of school was for a book publishing company, right? And there were as many people in the company as there are in this room. So let's assume you were the boss. There was me, the designer, and there was the part-time accountant. That was it.
But let me ask you this, like, so you started the studio not knowing how to do it, and you had 4 hires, and that's an achievement already, right? And then you went to The Hague. Like, whoa. What happened there?
I think we were working on things, and at the studio is called the Relay Room, and we had always told people like, yeah, we're the typography guys, we're the typography based studio, typography led studio, and everybody knew me as the type guy, all right, and so that was great, but I felt like a bit of an imposter, right? How can you be the type guy if you don't design type? You're just playing around with the shapes. Do you really have that understanding, that know-how, that knowledge? And so I was sort of lamenting. I said, I really want to try and learn type design. It's been a dream, right? To learn type design. But all the programs I was looking at were like, oh man, that's a year long. I'm married, I have a kid, I run a studio. How do I sacrifice a year? That seems like a big ask. And so my wife was like, do a summer school. And I'm like, no, there ain't no summer schools for this stuff. And she was like, I'll find one. And so she found Taipei Cooper, which was at that year that I went, 2012 was in its second year. The condensed program was in its second year. So yeah, so that was the last time I was in New York, 2013.
That must have been an amazing experience for you. I know very many people who took that program and come out the other end, doing some really amazing work.
It was super fun. It was like you discovered, it's like you discovered treasure.
Hmm.
And I was so excited. Every day was just, like I was like, wow, I'm in heaven. And you're just drawing type. You're learning how to, you're
Okay.
struggling through it, but like you're very happy doing it. And then I came back to Singapore and I realized, okay, I know how to use the software
Hmm.
roughly. I know some of the explanation behind the decisions, but I didn't really feel like I had enough knowledge to take the design forward. And I realized that I had bitten off. The itch was a bit too big to scratch now, and so that's when I started thinking, how do I get myself into this program, the year-long one? From like, oh, I'll just do 5 weeks. Now it's like I need to spend a year doing this.
Mm.
And crucial to that actually was I had one in particular, a very good mentor called Eben Sorkin, who is actually based in the US. He's stateside. He lives somewhere off Boston. Eben, if you are listening to this, thank you again. You've been pivotal in this journey. And I met him hilariously at a conference in Hong Kong in October that year after Taipei Cooper. I signed up for A Type Pi on a whim because it was in Hong Kong, and we sat at the table together and we just started talking, and we kept in touch. And he was very kind. He kept replying all my emails, saying, "Please look at my work. Please give me feedback on this typeface. Please look at my portfolio. I'm thinking of going to apply for this. What do you think I should include?" And he was saying, show as much process as you can.
Mm.
And so yeah, I think and I played the Asia card. I told the guys at Type in Media, I said, look, there are no programs in Asia to learn type design. I must come to The Hague. Please let me in so that I can learn this stuff because there's no way I'm going to learn it otherwise. Yeah.
I mean, this is so interesting because I'm from Indonesia, and some of you know this. And I always find myself between two worlds or three because my wife's
Mm,
Japanese, right? So I always find myself comparing how things are done, how the design culture is, in different countries. And eventually I've done this enough. I can see the evolution of how things change over time in the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades ago, right? Um, when I left Indonesia to study design in the States, design wasn't a thing. It was like, I don't know, it's more like craftsman's, right? Um, Now, and I've went through that same experience with you, Mark, where, where's type design in Indonesia? And I thought, well, what's going on here? I think there's a lot of opportunities on one hand. On the other hand, it's like no one wants this yet, and I was waiting for when that could happen. Um, right now, actually, it feels like the type design or typographic communities all around the world are starting to emerge, right? So the conversation is shifting, right? It's no longer about we need good design, we need good typography on everything. There is this sense of, how can we bring authenticity to typography, right?
Mm.
In the fonts that I design, because this is from Indonesia, for example, or it's from Singapore, right? And you have a project, Singapore Gothic. Can you talk a little bit
Yes,
about that?
yeah.
Because I feel like this touches on that notion of, finding something that's local and authentic.
Singapore Gothic basically is a collection of photographs of shop signage, basically. So there's before everything gets taken over by sort of these big
Hmm.
shopping malls, we've got all these individual, I guess in the US you would say mom and pop
Hmm.
stores. Um, and so, a lot of these are businesses that maybe have been around for the last 40, 50 years. And they've got various levels of hand painted or hand produced sort of signage. They're all got a lot of charm, but they disappear really, really
Mm.
quickly. And I decided, okay, well, it's now or never. I have to go and capture this. So for people who are listening, you can go on Singapore Gothic on Instagram. Singapore Gothic, a bit like American Gothic, that famous
Hmm.
painting. But yeah, Singapore Gothic. And then at some point, I felt, well, it's one thing to take the pictures. It's another thing to then go, okay, how can you take these letter forms and then revive them in some
Hmm.
way? It's not a strict revival. It's more like a homage of sorts
Hmm.
to sort of the quirkiness. In essence, it's a very straightforward design. It's what I would call like a straight-sided sans. It's very industrial. It's, more like painted by people who didn't have an understanding of letter forms or
Hmm.
typefaces. But they painted, like these letters because you had to, right? So the ever changing widths depending on how many words there were, but the shop, the width of the shop is the width of the sign. And yeah, different weights. And then of course I had to add a lowercase. So that was, kind of you're hunting around for inspiration for the
Hmm.
lowercase and trying to include, elements where it is not perfect, right? It breaks out of the very strict engineered sort of vision for it. And then talking about how long type design lasts, right? At some point, I had designed a whole bunch of things, and I looked at it and I was like, "Oh bugger, I've designed Euro style," and I
Oh
was
my
like,
God.
"Oh,
Yeah.
let's start again." So you go back to the source material and you try and sketch new stuff, and you're thinking, okay, how can I, kind of, and the design is so simple, right? You're not there's not like a lot that you can do. So it became a lot about what's the relationship of the straights to the curves, and how do you kind of vary that, intentionally, so that there is a certain level of uneasiness,
Hmm.
right? Which kind of hopefully speaks to the very handcrafted nature of what it is, because you're doing something entirely digital, right? But all your source material is like hand painted or handcrafted, and so there are these obvious imperfections that you need to try and synthesize somehow. Yeah, I've seen multiple variations in other people's fonts. I'm like, oh, they've designed something that looks really similar to Singapore Gothic too.
Yeah.
Crap. And I think at some point you just have to go, you know what? Just release it, right?
Right.
And put it out there, and hope for the best, basically. And of course talk about it. The story and the process, I think, is just as important as the product.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think as designers produce work, it's always the same, concern. Like, oh, I'm designing a logo, and I'm like, you go through all these notions and brainstorming. You present to the client, and then at the tail end, it's like, oh, that actually looks like another brand that exists already. So I can't imagine how it is
So
with, yeah, I mean that's your Eurostyle nightmare there, right? But I mean, okay, there are 26 letters, right, in the alphabet, uppercase only, right? And you have how many thousands of fonts out there, right? What are the
millions
chances
maybe.
that your design match exactly another font that exists already?
This kind of ties into your thought about that cultural aspect of it. I'm firmly of the belief that Asia is the next big
Mm.
thing in type
Hmm.
design. We've, for better or for worse, right? It has been rather waspy.
You got to explain that. What does that mean to
um,
you?
Type design in Asia has traditionally been sort of like, okay, Japanese designers, some Chinese designers, some Korean designers. It was like Southeast Asia is very underrepresented.
Hmm.
But in the last decade, right? I mean, you can attest to this, right? We've seen an explosion of type design and type practitioners in Indonesia. You can name a few off my hand already. Toko, Gumpitar is one.
Hmm.
There's the other guy who is in, I think he's in Bandung, if I'm not wrong,
Hmm.
or I don't even know his name, but I know his handle, which is Degarism.
Uh-huh.
And then in Thailand, Cats in Denmark has always been really strong, but then they've got a whole bunch of new up and coming type designers in Vietnam as
Hmm.
well. There have been quite a few type designers coming up, and finally in Singapore we have a few people, right, as well as Shweli and Co in Malaysia. So I feel and not to mention the Philippines as well. There's been a whole bunch of people there as well. So um, I feel the community is slowly growing, and in and of that, sort of trying to talking about how many typefaces they are. There's a whole section of influence and references and inspiration from these cultures that's completely missing in like a lot of the established sort of type fonts we see out there. I would argue that some of the more interesting typefaces are ones that are made in these
Hmm.
places that carry the influence of where they're from. I mean, I think that's one of the really fascinating things about typography, right? I like to say that it's both form and
Hmm.
function, right? So it's form because they're words made visual, and words are language, right? And language is intrinsically tied to culture. There's a famous sort of quote by Robert Bringhurst, I believe. It's letter forms are not just objects of science, they also belong to the realm of art and they participate in its history. They have changed over time, just as music, painting, and architecture have changed, right? So it's like they're intrinsically tied to like time and
Hmm.
place. And I think now it's a really interesting time to see how typography and type design are more open than ever, right? They're more accessible than ever. And I'll talk about accessibility in a
Hmm.
minute because that's my new project as well. But at the same time, there's a whole sort of inspiration and cultural aspect that is yet to kind of be fully absorbed, right? Southeast Asia as a region is just waiting to
Hmm.
explode, in type design. There's so many people who I've spoken to recently who said, yeah, I always wanted to make fonts. I always wanted to do type design. I always wanted to explore this, but I didn't know
Hmm.
how.
You said this is related to a project you're working on now. What is it?
Yeah, so the project is called Type Design Asia. It really is. I mean, it's exactly what it says, right? It's type design in
Hmm.
Asia. So I've shared earlier, right, how when I wanted to study type design, there really weren't any programs. There were no mentors. There were no schools. There was no program attached to a university that like there are in Reading or in The
Hmm.
Hague, and hence you make the trip, right, to go overseas, right, and then COVID happened,
Hmm.
and so everybody became very comfortable with Zoom and video conferencing. If they weren't comfortable already, became even more comfortable with it,
Hmm.
right? And so now we do have online programs, but hilariously none of them are based in Asia. They're all stateside or in Europe, and so it does feel like if you're a person in Asia and you want to learn type design, either you have to uproot yourself
Mhm.
and physically move, or you have to uproot your circadian rhythm and wake up really, really early to attend a class in, New
Right.
York or Los Angeles or whatever time it is, right? And then still go to work
Mhm.
after that. And I felt surely there is a way to do this for Asia in an Asian time zone, and so that's kind of the idea. It's also a way for me to give
Yeah.
back. I think, yeah, we did a 3 day sort of introduction to it wasn't introduction to type design. It was introduction to Glyphs, the software. It's coming at it from the angle of if you're a graphic
Mhm.
designer, Glyphs is a game changer. If you're a wannabe type designer, Glyphs is a necessity. And so learn
I think you're
glyphs,
talking to
right?
me, wannabe type designer.
Yes, yeah. Learn glyphs,
Yeah.
right? And then this is a kind of crash course, 3 days introduction,
Mhm.
and then sort of launch the course after that. So we're actually about to launch the full program soon. There's basically an introduction to type
Mhm.
design
Yeah.
101, which will be 9 weeks online. So anybody in Asia will be in English. Anybody in Asia time zone is more than welcome to attend. If you want to wake up at a weird time and you're in Europe to attend, you're more than welcome to as
Ha.
well.
Give him a
But
taste of your
it's
medicine, right? Of
generally, yeah,
just waking up in the middle of the
yeah,
night.
yeah, yeah. It's really geared towards people in Asia,
Yeah.
I think, because I feel, yeah, so many of us. I spoke to a bunch of designers in Indonesia, and I was asking them, well, how did you learn? So, oh, I learned from YouTube.
Mm.
I taught myself, and I was like, okay, that's great, but I know for a certainty that only takes you so
Right.
far. At some point, right, you in your journey, you do need someone to be a mentor or someone who's gone a little bit ahead of you who can see things that you can't
Yeah.
see. I wouldn't be where I am without the mentors that I had, right? I wouldn't have been able to apply or move forward with the design that I had finished at Cooper or started at Cooper without Eben's help. And then
Yeah.
later on, after graduating from Type and Media, I was in close contact for a while with Jean-François Porcher from Tipo Foundry, and we still keep in touch, right? But for a period of
Mhm.
time, he really served as a mentor to me as well. Kind of pointing out things
Yeah.
that I wouldn't otherwise sort of see in my work, right?
Yeah.
You kind of need somebody to prod you along.
I think we can find mentors in many things nowadays, right, in the resources. But as you said, nothing can replicate this sort of real apprenticeship relationship, where you really learn from a master, so to speak, right? A master being someone who with 10 years extra experience ahead of you, right? But as we grow older, we're not so young anymore. When I look back, I feel the same way about how can I actually throw the rope back? Can I pave the way for others like me, but 10, 20 years behind me, to follow the same path and actually emerge on the other side a much better designer than I have been all this time, right? And I think I love that idea. And this is actually one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because conversations like this to me reveals a lot of the inner workings of why we do these things. It's not just, oh, I've seen so and so's design work, it looks amazing, I'm a big fan. But now when you start to understand what goes behind it, why is this person thinking about when he or she is starting a project, or the struggles, it really reveals a lot. Now, I think, the other thing is, you mentioned something about how, the idea of typography, type design, it evolves over time, very much like, architecture and things. I think the additional aspect of typography is to me, it creates meaning every time. It creates an
Mm,
aesthetic that maybe augments or adds additional layer of aesthetic to any word that you typeset, right? You can typeset the word, for example, inclusion, right? And then you type that in a sans serif that feels really bold versus a serif that
Papyrus.
feels really classic. And it actually, yeah, well, I know, yeah. Are we creating bias or not? And this is actually, I have this book sitting here. I'm gonna just put it in front of the camera. This book was so revealing. This is a book that was published in 2017, so it's been a few years. It's The Politics of Design by Ruben Patter. I'm just going to read the backside of this. The Politics of Design explores the cultural and political context of typography, colors, photography, symbols, and information graphics that we use every day. Designers, communication specialists, and image makers possesses the power to shape visual communication, and with that power comes great responsibility. And guess what? That responsibility is every design is in many ways political. It creates a message, it creates bias, it creates, it changes people's mindset. Um, Now, what I love about your project, Type Design Asia, is I feel like what you're trying to do, and I could be wrong, but this is just my observation. Uh, you're empowering people, right, in Southeast Asia and Asian time zone to really use the language that's familiar to the world, which is, English, ABCs, Latin alphabets, right? And actually give them the ability to infuse a more vernacular aesthetic.
It's exactly, what you put it. You said empowering, and I think that when I look back, I've definitely been empowered by other people, and it seems remiss to not do the same for others. And if I want to see that sort of, if I want to have that community of type designers, to interact with, then I need to kind of try and grow that myself. There are these stories of how, I guess if you think about type design mecca, to use the word, most people would probably say Berlin. There's a abnormally large concentration of type designers in Berlin, and so they have these nights they call Tipo Stammtisch. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But it's basically an opportunity for type designers to just hang out in a bar, share drinks, and look at each other's work and give feedback, right? There is no opportunity to do that here because there are just not enough type designers, who are interested in that sort of thing. So yeah, and that was something that I was like, oh man, it would be awesome if we had a community. And I'm like, I've given up trying to hope that other people will catch the bug. I'm like, I need to be the one spreading the bug. You kind of move further up the food chain. So yeah, and if the vernacular influence comes in from there, from different cultures, then by all means. I think currently we've got one person from Hong Kong, two from Vietnam, maybe one from Indonesia, one Malaysian, a couple of Singaporeans. So I've got quite a few people already from Southeast Asia, different regions, signed up, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what comes back, in terms of influence, right? Yes, you're starting from the idea of a broad nib pen, and you're looking to create a text typeface, but the how you sort of transform your surroundings into what you make, that's unique to every individual.
Okay, so it's what, like 11 p.m. now there.
Yeah,
I don't want
no,
to
you've
take up
got
too
me
much of your
started.
time.
You've got me started. But yeah, no, thank you again for the.
Sorry, it's just so. Yeah, no. This has been really interesting. I think for, I don't know, maybe type nerds out there, but also type design wannabes like me, right? This is actually really interesting. Um, I I want to close with one thought, which is you had posted this recently, and I want to quote you on this. This is on Instagram. Art is a way to bring voice to the voiceless, to call attention once again to the things that we can get swept, that can get swept under the rug or the carpet. You have a voice. You have a voice. Celebrate it, use it, and honor it.
I've had this. I mean, this quote by. I mean, okay, so the post is actually a quote by Desmond Tutu, right? Who is the
Hmm.
famous
Hmm.
famous South African sort of. clergyman, Bishop Desmond Tutu, who, in in midst of apartheid, I think he talked about injustice, right? And the quote reads,
Hmm.
I must make sure that my sound is off because it will start playing. But if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its
Hmm.
foot on the tail of a mouse and you say you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Right? I remember reading this,
Hmm.
you know, years ago, going, "Oh, that's such an interesting." I love the imagery, right? If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say you are neutral, then the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. And recently I came across it again, and I just felt like, wow, that's so timely in the midst of all the things that are
Yeah,
going on in the world right now,
that's
where
right.
definitely there is injustice, right? Whichever way you want to spin it, I think there is injustice, right? I don't want to go into that; it's very heavy at the moment, but I
Hmm.
was, reflecting that it just almost seems frivolous to be focusing on something like type design or, design for that matter, or even to be on social media, right? You just, and my social media, a lot of it is anyway, it's following other designers. So you're just observing and admiring and celebrating other people's, awesome discoveries and work, right? Um, and it's like in the midst of that, people are trying to survive. In a different geography, people are
Hmm.
literally trying to survive. They don't know where their next meal is. They don't know all this stuff. And I was like, well, what is the role of art? In that sense, what role do we as artists play? And it's exactly that book that you were pointing out, right? The Politics of Design. If you,
Hmm.
as a designer, use the medium of design to communicate messages that go beyond just serving the corporate, big wig that's paying you, right? You're saying, well, I have these skill sets.
Hmm.
Yes, I earn a living from it. I design stuff for commercial clients. Um, but you also then use that same know-how and knowledge to create something that is for the world. As an artist or as a designer, I prefer the word artist. But as an artist, right, as someone who has the ability to, sort of craft messages um, using design, uh, using the tools of graphic design, then I need to be, I if you've been given an influence, right, then you need to use that somehow
Hmm.
properly. And so, yeah, it's like sort of how do you sort of put things out there? I think so much of social media also is inherently depressing. Um, you
Yeah.
know, I've had this thought for a longest time. I want to do this series called Internet Wisdom, where you
Hmm.
you you basically repurpose quotes you find online, and some of them are very funny. They're like, they could be either humorous or they could be positive, but the idea is that they're all generally supposed to be uplifting, right? The ones that we pick and choose for internet wisdom should be uplifting, because so much of social media is just downright depressing, right? And you want to stem you
Yeah.
want to stem the tide and include people, right? It's inherently designed to be very isolating. You want to kind of include people as well in it. I think that's
Yeah.
what draws me to kind of putting it out there, right? Saying, okay, you have a
Yeah.
voice. First, it's not just enough
Yeah.
to say, okay, use it, right? Most people are like, okay, well, we'll celebrate it. That's like when I wrote that celebrate it, is you really have to kind of go like, wow, I have a voice. I've been given a voice.
Yeah.
And you realize that, wow, it's an incredible privilege to have that, right? To be able to have, like the ability to say what you want to say on on any platform like social media.
That notion that when you have a voice, it's almost like a responsibility in a
Yeah.
way, for you to actually use that voice and help others, or celebrate that voice. And I think it's funny as well, in the order of things that we try to design in life, to try to control the outcome, things don't always go according to plan, and I think and it's very similar in how design also works, right? You think one direction is going to work, and it turns out when you try it, it doesn't. But I think that the idea that you just go for it, right? You go for it, use that voice of yours that's unique to you, who you are.
Mm.
I think it will take you somewhere. I wanna close with that thought. I think again I've taken too much of your time because it's so late there, but
All good, all
I
good.
really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm really stoked to have this opportunity. Thank you for inviting. I hope that we can hang out properly in person soon.
Come over to New York. We'll host an event together.
I would love to. I would love to. It's on my bucket list to actually make it in person to a typographics at some point. So it just finished, right? So yeah, well, I'll get there.
Yeah,
Maybe next
yeah.
year. Maybe next year.
Thank you for listening. Thank you, Mark, again for chatting with me. I will see you next time where we'll talk about art, business, technology, and everything, how everything correlates with design and life. Thank you. See you next time.